There was a strange apartment in the apartment building where I was renting. Although this apartment was in the high-end segment, the rental price was very cheap. The current owner of the apartment was a young female office worker. She lived in an apartment alone and had only recently moved here. Until one day the girl was about to go to bed after a long day of working outside when she encountered a scary and strange thing right in her apartment. At that time, she was standing in the bathroom and looking in the mirror when suddenly, outside the door, there was a shadow of another girl with long, flowing hair looking at her from outside. The female office worker, the owner of the apartment, did not have time to understand what was happening when suddenly this woman moved quickly and rushed through the door. The young girl thought that a stranger had broken into her apartment, so she immediately ran out to check. When she went out, the hallway outside had become strangely cold and gloomy. The girl came from the bathroom and looked in the direction the strange woman had just passed. That woman also knew that the girl had seen her. She stood still, her back to the inside with a very mysterious gesture. Then, slowly the woman turned back. She looked monstrous, her eyes bloodshot like the devil, her skin pale and pale like a dead person. She looked at the girl with a devilish smile. The horror didn't stop there. The strange woman suddenly greeted the girl. The horror image in front of the girl made her bewildered. Knowing she had encountered something she couldn't have met, the girl could only explain in panic. Her screams echoed throughout the apartment block. But when they heard the screams coming from this apartment, no one who lived in the building dared to go to the apartment to check and act like they didn't know anything. The following day, the girl went to the building's management office to narrate everything that happened the previous night. After the young employee heard the story, he felt that this girl was just hallucinating, so he apologized profusely and reassured the girl with a few idle sentences to finish the story. This young man's superficial attitude made the girl even angrier. She demanded that the management return her rent and deposit. After saying that, the girl hurriedly went out and returned to her apartment to pack up her luggage, prepared to move to another apartment to live in because she no longer dared to stay in this place. When the girl left, the young man felt strange. He went to his boss and asked him why every guest in that apartment said the apartment was haunted. The boss heard, then sighed. When he was calm, he confirmed to the young man that what the girl said was true. When the young man heard that, he became more and more curious, asking his boss the beginning and the end of the story. After listening to this, the manager also slowly recalled and told the employee who had just come in to hear the story that had happened in this apartment. He said that the apartment was haunted by a case that happened nearly 10 years ago. At that time, the whole building was the most famous luxury apartment project in the city. In the same haunted apartment, its previous owner was a woman named Wing. She rented this apartment to live alone. Occasionally, her lover would visit and sleep over. Her affair was a wealthy but married businessman. The two had a long-standing affair because Wing's fiancé settled in the US and would welcome her to live there next year. Wing loved this mistress very much, but in the man's heart, Wing was just a stupid girl and had a lot of money. His purpose in approaching Wing was to extract her money. On the contrary, Wing was infatuated with the handsomeness and style of her lover. She determined to serve him to the end. That time, like so many other times before, he asked Wing for money under the pretense of investing in a business project. She waited until the lover was gone, then took out her phone and called her fiancé to ask for money. It was not the first time Wing had asked for money from her fiancé to give it to her lover. every time she came up with compelling reasons. One day, Wing was asking for money from her fiancé as usual with the excuse to send it back to her family when suddenly disaster struck. It was around noon. The whole building was empty of people. No one noticed what was around them. Wing was sitting in the house talking on the phone when suddenly the doorbell rang. Curious, she turned off the phone and went out to check it out. Wing looked through the small window on the door, and outside was a middle-aged man, said to be the building management. Wing didn't think anything of it, opened the door, and invited the man inside with a carefree attitude. Unexpectedly, the door just opened. The man's arm pushed inside, making Wing suddenly unable to react. Two men suddenly burst into Wing's apartment, including her fiancé. He directly slapped her like hell and then blamed her for cheating on him. Wing then fell to the ground, powerless to resist. Her fiancé and his friend took her to her bedroom and assaulted her. Wing held the phone in one hand to call her lover and repeatedly plead with the other two men to spare her life. But her fiancé refused to agree to forgive her. He said he had to take revenge on her today. Both men walked in front of Wing. Wing screamed for help, but no one around could hear her screams. Her fiancé rushed over, grabbed Wing's hair, put her on the bed, and then with his friend did an act of debauchery with her. Wing screamed in pain and despair. Outside, her lover had also been standing there before, but he did not dare to enter because of his cowardice. He stood trembling in shock at the door and did not dare to shout for fear of being implicated. After a while of ideological struggle, Wing's lover also decided to leave the apartment, running straight out as if he didn't know anything. When her lover ran away, Wing's voice also stopped. The whole room fell into silence. Then two men from the apartment also came out. Wing was raped by both men and then strangled to death with a belt. Her body lay on the ground motionless, looking very pitiful. Wing's body lay there until the evening without anyone around or knowing what had happened. In the middle of the night, the lover decided to return to Wing's apartment by way of the balcony to get his phone back and not wanting to be involved in Wing's affairs. He climbed through the window and went straight into Wing's bedroom. At that time, he did not know that Wing was already dead, so he calmly went inside. But when he got there, the lights of the apartment were turned off. He thought he could safely leave this troubled woman. He went to the kitchen first to check, but overall everything was neat and undisturbed. Then he sneaked into the bedroom, alone. In the darkness, he saw Wing lying dead on the ground, but his face showed no trace of panic. He searched the room in hopes of finding his phone quickly, and then left the scene before becoming a suspect in a murder. But before he could find his phone, he heard a cold breath behind him. And Wing's voice calling to him began to resound with hatred. He unconsciously turned back to check and saw that Wing had turned into a ghost with bloodshot eyes, her mouth constantly rebuking him for abandoning her. Her face revealed a terrifying horror. She cursed her lover to the fullest, scolded him severely, and forced him to stay with her forever. A moment later, in front of the betrayed mistress was a dark night. He screamed in terror and then turned into a madman. He found a chair in the house and prepared himself a noose on high, and then committed suicide. The bodies of both were found only when they were in a state of decomposition, emitting a stench. The case had not yet caught the main culprit. Since then, the souls of both had been trapped in the apartment, causing many tenants to move elsewhere. Some say they encountered a girl's spirit with a look of hatred. Others say they encountered a man. The story ends in the young man's panic. Later, the apartment was also locked and sealed, not allowing anyone to enter it ever again. This story is a true one I witnessed and which haunts me to this very day. When I was in middle school, I attended a gifted boarding school in the district. It was also the first time I had to live away from home and be independent. The dorm room I stayed in had 4 students, including one named Ben. He was eccentric, just lounging around in his room all day. Even though I asked him out to play football, he refused time and time again. He seemed to have a hard time getting along with anyone. Over time, we also became afraid of him, but he was the one who wanted to isolate himself, not because we shunned him. What was stranger was that he just liked to sleep all day. At the end of class, he would turn back to his room, climb into bed and sleep, as if sleeping was his only passion. A month later, something scary started happening to us. That night, I was sleeping when I heard strange noises. It seemed that the sound of the door opening was waking me up. I became curious and thought it must be one of the friends in the room getting up to no good in the bathroom. However, that day I still smelt a burning smell from somewhere. I sat up immediately, grabbed the flashlight from under the pillow, and shone the light around. I also asked, "Who's there? If you're just going to the bathroom, don't be so noisy." I shined my flashlight at Ben's place, but he was nowhere to be found. I thought it was true that he just went out to go to the toilet. My voice woke the other 2. Everyone was sleeping and told me not to pay attention to what Ben was doing because he must have had a stomachache, and that was why he smelled like that. Then we didn't think much of Ben but laid down and continued to sleep. It was quite cold that night. Near morning I suddenly woke up because I felt the need to urinate and decided to go out to the bathroom. I looked over at Ben's bed and was amazed. Ben hadn't yet come back. The door was still open. Why was he out all night? I walked out slowly. I would go to see what was wrong with Ben. This guy had a lot of weird actions, but after all, he was still my roommate. I should take care of him too, of course. As I neared the door, I suddenly heard footsteps. At this point, Ben walked in. His face looked quite tired. I called to him. "Ben, do you have diarrhea or something? The crime of eating so much, hey? Your face looks so unsightly." This time, however, Ben did not say anything. His face was like a lost soul, not responding to my words as he kept walking. It felt very strange. Normally Ben would answer anything I asked, but that day his attitude was very strange. I did not know what was happening. As I looked at him, I realized he was walking very strange. Even when Ben climbed into bed, he did not take off his slippers. He was really eccentric. I thought of going over there to tell him to take off his sandals, but at the time, I wanted to pee, so I just ignored him. The following day, I decided to tell the story of Ben to 2 of my roommates and ask them all to see where Ben went. I assumed he was sleepwalking. As I expected that night, the door opened again. Ben walked out with a strange gait.
The three of us were curiously watching from behind, wondering if this guy was doing something shady, or was he really sleepwalking as I guessed. There was indeed something shady. Ben didn't go to the bathroom but walked past it. He then walked up the stairs, as we slowly followed. Ben continued to walk up to the 4th floor with a lost soul, then to the 5th floor. Again, our dorm room had 5 floors, and we were on the 3rd floor. Because the number of students was not that much, the 4th and 5th floors were empty. We felt curious. What was Ben doing there? Above the 5th floor was empty space, darkness, where the air was cold and the musty smell was creepy. When we got there, Ben was nowhere to be found. We felt weird, knowing that he was there. How could he disappear so fast? But just then suddenly a girl's cry rang out at the end of the corridor, accompanied by a scary interrupting voice. We felt chills down our spines. This place was a male dormitory, so why was there a female up here? Maybe they were ghosts. Just thinking about it, all three of us got goosebumps. We gathered courage and walked to the room at the end of the hallway. We wanted to go to where the crying was coming from. I thought that maybe Ben was hiding some scary secret. In the dim darkness, 2 black figures appeared by the window. They were facing the window and with their backs to us. I recognized one person as Ben, but the long-haired girl beside him, we didn't know who she was. At this point, we understood and looked at each other and smiled. It turned out that Ben was secretly dating a girlfriend in this area. We didn't expect a shy guy like Ben to have a girlfriend. As if he heard our laughter, Ben suddenly turned his face. However, the strange thing was, where was the girl standing next to him? The three of us went inside the room. I cheerfully teased Ben that he had a girlfriend and refused to introduce her to us. He secretly met up here late at night. Is that what you were doing, Ben? However, when we shone the flashlight into the room, we did not see their girlfriend, but she was just there, right there. We curiously shone the light across the room to look for her, but there was absolutely no one there. What the hell was going on? I walked over and looked out the window. Strangely enough, this was the 5th floor area, empty of all people. Did we get dizzy just then? Ben was still standing motionless and neither spoke nor answered our questions. I pointed my flashlight at him. It was scary that Ben's face became very strange. He was crying, and his eyes were white. What was really strange was that the tears kept coming from his eyes, as it turned out that he was the one crying all the time. All three of us were startled when we saw Ben's scary expression. So all the noises were coming from Ben, and we didn't see any girls in the room. One of us thought that Ben was sleepwalking. He even asked if he should wake up. Before he could finish his sentence, he reached out and took Ben's shoulder. But the unexpected thing happened. Ben collapsed immediately, unconsciously. After seeing the scene in front of them, everyone was scared and quickly called for help. Then I heard from the manager again that Ben had a history of sleepwalking and had only recently gotten worse. The hospital later reported that Ben's life was not in danger, but his health was deteriorating. The strange thing was that the dormitory manager told us not to spread the scary story around. I also didn't know if Ben's sleepwalking was real, and who was that girl standing next to him? This was all still a mystery to me.
I had a close friend. He was in the same class and also lived near my house. We used to play very well together, going home together after school. Until one day my friend stopped talking to me and went home alone without waiting for me. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't answer me. No matter how many times I called him, he kept silent. It wasn't until I touched his shoulder that he jumped all over, turning to look at me with a listless, panicked face. His face became thinner, more emaciated than before, like it was suffering from some disease. I tried to ask him about it, but he still wouldn't answer any questions. On the contrary, he went straight ahead, silently. His strange attitude confused me. The following day I went to class and saw his mother come to the homeroom teacher to ask him to take a few days off from school. I felt worried about my friend's health, so that afternoon just after school I ran to his house to ask. I went to his house after school. I knocked on the door for a while when his mother opened the door and invited me in. She also said that he was seriously ill. I asked his mother's permission to come into his room to visit him. After receiving the consent, I went straight to my friend's room. I found my friend lying on the bed in the room. His face was clearly worn out. He looked at me with a strange, soulless expression. I pulled up a chair and sat down next to him. As soon as he saw me, he brightened up a bit, but his skin still looked extremely pale. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me he was having a strange problem that kept him awake for many days. I listened to him and became more and more curious, asking what he was all about, why he was so haunted that he couldn't sleep. Until that time, he told me a whole story. A few days ago, he accidentally met a woman on his way home from school. That woman crossed the intersection at the corner of his house but was accidentally hit by a speeding car. After that impact, the injured woman lay in a pool of crimson blood and the car quickly sped forward and disappeared. He was a witness to the end. He also remembered the license plate of the car that caused the accident. Out of curiosity, he ran to see how the woman was. That woman looked up at him with her whole body covered in blood and weak eyes. She whispered to him. The woman used her weak breath and begged him for help. He called the ambulance and the police to help her. But when he saw the woman whose body was covered in blood, with her voice so weak, my friend also guessed that the woman would not survive. Instead of helping the woman, he coldly walked away. He was afraid that if anyone saw him, he would be the one involved in the accident. After that, he left the woman who got into the accident on the road, and he ran as fast as he could home, pretending not to know anything. Since that day, he did not know about the news of the accident anymore, but he encountered some strange phenomena. Since then, his nature also became taciturn and quiet. His parents asked him no matter what he did, not bother to answer a single question. His skin became pale and paler. His eyes were black because of staying up all night, and his body was also extremely weak. Every time he came home from school, he locked himself in the house, refusing to eat. He surprised his worried parents. As for himself, after he abandoned that woman, he always had the feeling that someone was watching him, making him extremely afraid. He also didn't know what was wrong with him. Every day the feeling that someone was behind him became bigger. Every night he seemed to have a fever. The whole body became cold and uncomfortable, and the sweat fell non-stop. He kept dreaming over and over again, one nightmare after the other, that made him so haunted and terrified that he didn't dare to sleep again. In the middle of the night, my friend was screaming in fear. His whole body was struggling as if to escape something. His body always felt heavy, as if there were thousands of rocks pressing on him. It was difficult for him to breathe and move. After a while, he felt like he wanted to die, clearly like someone was strangling him. He wanted to ask his parents for help, but every time something happened, he couldn't open his mouth or say anything. After struggling with that uncomfortable feeling, he finally could sleep again. But the strange dream always haunted him. This time, he felt everything very clearly. My friend thought that he was haunted by the psyche after that woman's accident, so he told his story to his mother, making her very confused. At first, he still tried to go to school, but every time he went out, he became tired, frustrated, and didn't want to meet or interact with anyone. Because of that, his learning was also declining day by day. That night, he decided to tell the whole thing to his parents. He thought that he was suffering from psychological problems because he was so obsessed with the accident. After listening to him, his parents did not stop worrying and discussing how to solve his problems. His father reassured him and said he would take him to see a psychologist for treatment and try his best to comfort and coax him. The following night, his father was so worried about him that his father decided to sleep in my friend's room for the sake of checking. But even if there was his father in the room, that nightmare still happened and scared him. In the middle of the night, his father saw him writhing in the bed. His mouth said something not clear, but he seemed very frightened. After a while, he returned to normal, but tears were already pouring down his face and saliva was running down both cheeks. My friend didn't dare to sleep anymore. He was afraid that every time he slept, that terrible nightmare would happen again.
Daddy, help me! The nightmare is so scary!
His father could only reassure his spirit that he could sleep for a while and be healthy to see the doctor. The following day, his father tried to stick around his bed with golden talismans used to calm his spirit and ward off evil spirits. But these talismans did nothing to protect him. That night the nightmare came back, and it was worse than ever. He seemed to have lost all of his soul. He lay stiff on the bed with his cold body, which made his father extremely worried. He finally couldn't take it anymore and went crazy, screaming all the time. His head began to appear in unpleasant pain. His health also deteriorated day by day. His mother was so worried that she cried all of her tears. She tried to do everything to help him, but in the end, she still could not relieve his condition. Meanwhile, his father went to see a psychologist for advice. His father was advised by his doctor to put a CCTV camera in his room for the doctor to monitor. His parents followed the doctor's orders and put a camera in his room that pointed directly at the bed. Every night, his parents monitored him from the monitor connected to the camera to see how he was doing. Unknowingly during that time, his parents discovered the cause that made him like a person who had lost his mind. In the middle of the night, he had another convulsion. But in the monitor, his parents not only saw him writhing in the room alone, but also another person. It was a hazy woman sitting on the bed, with hands clasped around his neck. Very scary. But at this moment, the strange woman discovered that she was being followed by the camera. She turned a bloody and horror face straight into the camera. His parents panicked and rushed to his room to check, but the woman was nowhere to be found, not even a trace. When his father saw this, he worriedly ran to the bed, trying to wake my friend up. After my friend woke up, he couldn't remember anything. He looked at his father bewilderedly and asked what had happened. His father worried that after knowing everything, my friend was even more scared than before. Therefore, his father decided to hide this horror story from him. But then, his father knew that he couldn't hide it for too long. So, the father played the video he filmed in my friend's room for him to see. When the woman's face appeared, my friend immediately recognized it as the woman he had met. His father was surprised and asked him what relationship he had with this strange woman. He sighed and lowered his face. He admitted that he saw the woman in an accident at that time. She begged for his help, but he ran away. His parents then took him to the police to report the accident and learned that the woman did not survive because of too much blood loss. He also thought that part of the fault was because he didn't help the woman, so she died. So that night, he brought the votive paper to burn at the corner of the intersection. This place was where that accident happened. Then he reported to the police the license plate number and the specific time of the incident for the police to investigate. Fortunately, thanks to his testimony, the police caught the culprit of the accident. His health had since also begun to recover. Aki and Nara were a recently married couple. To live a more comfortable life, the two decided to purchase an apartment in the suburbs. Both of them were overjoyed because they had discovered a location that was both inexpensive and convenient for travel. Sweet happiness didn't last long, as both of them were subjected to a terrifying story. It happened just a few weeks after the two moved into this apartment. There was an apartment in front of their house that was said to be empty, but Nara had seen a woman standing in front of the apartment door several times. When Nara noticed it, the woman turned to face the door, mumbling something inaudible. Although Nara was concerned about this issue, because Aki was preoccupied with the game, he only said a few words of comfort to calm her down. "There's nothing where there are no strange neighbors." Thinking everything would pass, Aki unexpectedly met the woman after his overtime work and returned home late. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, Aki noticed a woman standing in front of the door to the apartment opposite his. The woman stood motionless, her head against the door frame, muttering something that piqued Aki's interest. Her behavior was identical to what Nara had described earlier. He also purposefully moved closer to hear her words clearly. It turned out that the woman wanted to enter the house but was unable to do so. Aki wondered if it was because she hadn't brought her keys, so he asked her if there was anyone else inside so he could assist her in calling and asking them to open the door. When she heard that, the woman turned her head and looked at Aki, her face expressionless, and explained that she was the only one living here and that there was no key to open the door. With no other option, Aki offered to call a locksmith to assist in opening the door. Following that, he immediately dialed the repair center, explained the situation to them, then hung up and went home, leaving the woman outside to wait. After about half an hour of resting in his house, he heard a knock on the door outside. The locksmith asked who needed assistance unlocking the door as soon as he saw Aki. Aki also quickly led the man over to the opposite apartment to meet the woman, but she was nowhere to be found. The locksmith assumed she had already found the key and entered the room. So the locksmith sighed and walked away. What a waste of time, despite Aki's apology, and offered to reimburse his travel expenses, which he declined. Things began to become more terrifying and terrifying as the days passed. When Nara and Aki were fast asleep in the middle of the night, they both heard a voice outside the door. Due to the quiet of the night, a loud cry woke both of them up, especially the cry that sounded like a lament, which was very sad. Because it was unusual for someone to call the door in the middle of the night, Nara did not dare to go see what was going on, so she let Aki open the door himself. On his face, Aki appeared unconcerned, but he was irritated at being bothered in this manner. He rolled out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and walked slowly to the door. The closer he got, the clearer the cry became. When Aki arrived at the door, he didn't rush to open it, but instead looked outside through the binoculars on the door to see who it was. At first glance, it appeared to be the same woman he had seen the last time. This time, however, she turned to find his family. Even more horrifying, Aki could see the corners of her eyes and her mouth bleeding and a distressed expression. She seemed to be aware that Aki was looking through the binoculars on the door, so she sobbed even more and begged him to help her. When Aki saw the scene, he became so nervous and scared that he suffocated and backed away from the door. Fortunately, the woman did not move. Aki quickly dashed back to his bedroom. Nara asked who was outside the door after noticing Aki's pale face and knowing there was something scary outside. To avoid frightening his wife, Aki pretended to be calm, claiming that it was just the cat meowing. Nara felt much better after hearing her husband say that. There were no more cries outside. Nara went to bed right away after solving the problem, but her husband couldn't sleep. He sat with his back to the head of the bed, his mind racing over what had just occurred. Aki requested a day off from work on Monday because he was sick. When his wife left for work, he went straight to the apartment building's management office to inquire about it. As soon as Aki walked into the office, he yelled at the manager, "You scammed us! This apartment has ghosts! That's why it's so cheap, isn't it?" The manager didn't understand what Aki said, and he was perplexed by what Aki said about ghosts. Aki immediately informed the manager of everything that had occurred over the last few days. The manager appeared suspicious, but he maintained a serious expression and listened intently to what Aki had to say. The manager quickly took out a small notebook with dense notes, as well as a large number of contact information for people who used to live here. He checked carefully and immediately found a phone number of Taro, the former owner who used to live in the apartment across the hall from Aki. They hadn't seen him in the apartment in 2 months. The manager paused for a moment, recalling that the last time he saw a woman accompanying him into that apartment was 2 months ago. Linking the facts, Aki suspected that there was a problem with that apartment, so he devised a plan to visit it to ascertain the situation. The manager, on the other hand, disagreed with Aki because it was someone else's house. Aki did not have the right to enter on his own. The manager considered that even if the apartment had problems, the management wasn't responsible for them. Aki was disappointed and concerned as he walked out of the management office. As he sat at home, he began to consider a few things. He and his wife had used up all of their savings to buy this house, and they still owed a significant amount of money to the bank. So they couldn't just walk away because they were haunted. The more he thought about it, the more enraged he became, and he didn't want his life to be ruined as a result of these things. He also couldn't afford to waste time waiting for someone else to solve the problem. He noticed the crowbar in the corner of the wall as soon as he looked to the side. When he looked at it, he had an idea. He stood up and looked towards the crowbar. To find the truth, he did not hesitate to make amends for the damage of that apartment. Thinking about it, Aki grabbed the crowbar and proceeded to the apartment across the hall. Aki inserted one end of the crowbar into the door and then tried his hardest to pry it open. An impact force deformed the door lock after hearing a few clicks. Finally, it was opened. Aki kicked open the door to gain courage. The door swung open quickly and collided with the wall, causing the door frame to be shaken. At that moment, an object fell from the door frame and landed hard on the ground. Aki quickly picked it up and discovered it to be a bronze mirror. This item was used to expel demons, and it was frequently hung in front of a house. He returned his gaze to the room. The surroundings were dusty and the air was gloomy and ghostly. At this point, Aki noticed a faint odor, not too rotten but strong enough to guess it was the stench of corpses. When he discovered suspicious traces, he abruptly came to a halt in front of a wall. The wall was streaked with light red water that emitted a stench. Water stains appeared to be leaking from within this wall. Aki was terrified when he realized what was behind the wall, but he had no choice but to dig into it in order to get an answer. Aki used all of his strength to hit the wall with the crowbar, and each piece of cement quickly broke down. The peculiarity was the concrete layer was not hard or thick but rather a thin layer. After the outer layer was removed, a layer of granular black material appeared. Aki quickly reached out to brush away the layer of black grains. Then he touched something very soft and sticky. Aki began to tremble in fear after touching something filthy, and his forehead was also covered in beads of sweat. He didn't dare to wipe with his hand anymore, so he took a crowbar and continued chiseling the lime on the wall to see clearly. After the layers of material fell away, a purple-blue hand appeared on the wall, showing signs of decay and looking extremely frightening. Because he was terrified, Aki immediately backed away, his entire body trembling violently. Finally, he had to try to hold back his vomiting and flee this apartment. The police arrived less than half an hour after Aki called them and sealed off the entire scene. They also discovered the body of a woman who had been dead for more than 2 months in the wall. After the police began their investigation, they were able to identify the perpetrator, who also happened to be the owner of the apartment, Mr. Taro. The deceased woman was his lover, according to the testimony. Mr. Taro inadvertently killed the woman with a knife due to a personal conflict. He attempted to conceal his crime by concealing her body in the wall. To keep the stench at bay while hiding the body, he applied a layer of activated bamboo charcoal to the surface. As a result, when Aki punched the wall, the black granular soft substance that appeared was activated carbon. Aki later thought of it, perhaps because he was afraid of the witch's vengeance, so he attached a bronze mirror to prevent the woman from entering his house. Immediately after Mr. Taro's crimes were exposed, Nara and Aki no longer saw the woman's ghost. However, the apartment opposite their house was still sealed off and silent, sometimes causing them to live in fear.
The main characters in today's story are Kiba and his family. After considering his circumstances, Kiba decided that his whole family would move to a large house so that his wife, children, and old mother could have a more comfortable life. The new house that Kiba bought was close to the old one, so moving was quite convenient. Kiba had also bought new furniture to redecorate the house and make it more spacious and comfortable. Kiba's mother was 70 years old this year. Although she was weak, she was eager to help her son. Kiba's wife was also very excited, wanting to help clean the new house. Kiba told his mother to just relax and go for a walk around the house, leaving everything to him and his wife. Kiba's son was also extremely interested and intrigued by this new space, so he kept running around. By nighttime, the whole family had finally finished cleaning up this new house. Kiba was a very loyal son, so he prepared his mother's room thoughtfully, and before going to bed, he asked her if everything was good enough, and if she needed anything, she must just ask him. Kiba knew she had been cleaning and helping all day, so she should have an early night. He then advised his mother to sleep early and exited her room. Tomorrow morning, he would go to the market to buy some personal things for her. Then Kiba also returned to his room. His wife was putting things together in the room, and his son was already sleeping. Kiba's wife asked him if his mom was asleep. She thought that she had looked a bit sad that day. Kiba said that maybe it was because she had to leave her old house, where she created so many memories, but that she would be fine with time. Both Kiba and his wife slept until dawn, since they were so tired from the previous day. Since he didn't see his mother waking up early as usual, Kiba came knocking on her door. He kept calling her, but she didn't answer. Seeing that, his wife's face couldn't hide her concern. She suddenly recalled that his mom woke up early every day. Why would she get up so late today? A feeling inside her told her that something bad had happened. So Kiba quickly pushed the door down and entered, calling his mother's name. Once inside, Kiba saw his old mother still lying on the bed, carefully covered with the blanket. However, she still didn't respond to their words, not even a flinch. This made both of them extremely concerned. They both walked to the side of her bed and noticed she was okay. The daughter-in-law sighed in relief. She was sleeping so deeply that neither the husband nor his wife could wake her up. Then the couple decided to go out and let the mom rest. The mother kept sleeping all day until the night fell. It wasn't until dinner that Kiba's mother woke up and opened the door to enter the dining room. However, her face today looked strange. Kiba and his wife asked if she had a good night's sleep, but she said nothing. Just like that, the mother sat down on the chair, picked up a bowl of rice, and devoured it. She ate it as if she hadn't eaten in days. Observing this, Kiba's face started to look surprised. She looked strange today. Something was off. Suddenly, Kiba's son screamed. His mouth stuttered and his whole body trembled. The boy looked at his grandma with horror, as if he had seen something terrible. He suddenly started growling. Kiba's wife asked him what had happened, but he only kept looking back and forth between his grandma and his mother while crying. He cried even louder, then pointed his finger at her and said it was not his grandmother. Kiba and his wife were both extremely confused as to what was going on. Kiba turned to tell his mother that she should eat slowly, otherwise she would choke. However, at that moment, the mother suddenly froze. Only an annoyed growl came out of her mouth. Kiba looked terrified. Why had his mother suddenly changed? Kiba's wife was so scared that she turned pale and thought, why had her mother-in-law become so scary today? Their son kept on crying, louder and louder. After finishing all the food on the table, the mother stood up and walked straight back into her room. Kiba's wife knew something was wrong. Ever since they moved into this house, she seemed to be different. Scared and worried, Kiba followed his mother into the room to see if she had any health problems. He gently knocked on the door, called out to his mother, and carefully stepped inside. But just like before, not even a single word came from her mouth. Only a terrifying growl. When Kiba approached her, she turned around and with a horrifying face, she shouted for him to get out of the room. She then started rushing towards Kiba, still shouting. By then, Kiba was truly terrified by his mother, but afraid of what might happen, he decided to look from the outside of the room. The wife thought her mother-in-law was dissatisfied with the change of houses, and that's why she was acting so oddly. But Kiba disagreed and reassured his wife that when they moved in there, she was happy, and that it was unlike her to get this angry. Then Kiba thought that maybe it was because she was unfamiliar with the place, but she would be fine after resting. After that, the couple also went to their bedroom, but they were both unable to sleep that night because of the strange events that happened that day. The next day, at the crack of dawn, Kiba woke up from his wife's screams. The wife was now holding her head down, with her hands on her face. Kiba thought his wife had fallen or bumped her head against the wall, so he hurried to her. It turned out that wasn't the case. He could see that his wife's hair had been cut off by someone else. His wife just sat there in pain and panic. It was in that moment that Kiba started to really panic, realizing his mother was maybe the culprit. Despite how unlikely that might have been, he began to doubt the house. The wife kept crying, and Kiba tried to comfort her, but it didn't calm her down at all. One shocking event was not over yet when another came. They realized their son was nowhere to be found. Kiba and his wife started to worry, so they both rushed out to find their child. Although they searched everywhere, they could not find him. They were both truly afraid. Kiba even ran into the neighbor's house looking for his son, but no luck. The wife was at home, calling out for her son, but no response could be heard. They both felt helpless. They clasped their hands and prayed for their son's well-being. Then, they suddenly saw the son run out of his grandma's room, holding a carefully framed photo. Kiba and his wife were surprised that their son ran into her room to play. Without saying anything, The boy held the photo frame that his grandmother gave him in front of them. Both of them looked at the photo and suddenly felt as if something cold ran through their spines. Their faces were still in shock. In the photo was a family of 4, including an old woman, a couple, and a son, exactly like Kiba's family. The only discernible difference was that the woman's hair in the photo was shorter. Even more frightening, just a second later, the image of the mother in the photo suddenly turned into an image of Kiba's mother, but with a terrifying look. "What is this all about?" Kiba's wife exclaimed. "Why is your mother in this picture?" She showed extreme fear and concern. Surely this house was haunted. Why else would her hair be cut short when she woke up? And just like in the picture. Suddenly, at that moment, inside of Kiba's mother's room, a burst of flames came out. Kiba was so scared, so he asked his wife to watch over their son. He needed to run inside to save his mom. Inside the room was so smoky. Kiba tried to break in, hoping his mother would be okay. Once inside, Kiba stood and looked bewildered. The flames were so big. The person who caused the fire was none other than his mother, who was fanning the fire vigorously while shouting. Despite Kiba's best efforts to stop and bring her outside, she screamed and told him to get out of this house. Then she shouted that Kiba was a disloyal son and that he needed to give her life back. Ignoring her delusion, Kiba tried to stop his mother's odd behavior, then pulled her out the fire. As he did so, a large wooden bar fell straight down from the burning ceiling. The whole house was now engulfed in flames. His mother had passed out by now. Kiba tried his best to bring her towards the door. Kiba used all his strength to carry his mother and rushed out of the flames. Seeing him and his mother come out, his wife let out a small sigh of relief. Soon, the house was burned down. The fire spread too quickly and was too fierce and fast. The couple could only helplessly watch all their possessions dissipate in the rage of fire. A few hours later, the fire had gone out, but the house was left with nothing. Kiba and his wife quickly carried their mother into an ambulance. They don't know why it happened, but thought that perhaps this was the result of angry souls in the house. Through research, Kiba learnt about the terrifying event that happened to the previous house's owners. The son and daughter-in-law tricked the mother into signing the rights to the house to them and kicked the mother out of it. But that same night, out of rage and revenge, the mother came back with a can of gas and burned down the house. The whole family of 4 died together in the sea of fire. The house was then rebuilt and sold to Kiba's family, who unexpectedly moved to the house filled with spirits. Kiba had no choice but to sell the land and move to another city.
In my neighborhood had just appeared a massive hotel. It looked very luxurious. When the hotel was built, it was inevitable that people would talk about it. The hotel used to be an old apartment building. It was the most famous building in my neighborhood for being haunted. When the apartment building was still in operation, people living here all heard the cry of a woman lying on the top floor of the building. The crying was very loud, making many people in the building uncomfortable because they could not sleep. The crying kept echoing no matter how much the neighbors reminded the building management. This situation did not decrease. The problem continued until the people living in the building could not bear it anymore and chose to solve it themselves. Until one day, the people in the building couldn't stand the crying. They decided to come together to remind the owner to check and see what was happening. The men who lived in the building at the time followed the cry together, going upstairs to check it out. Later, they located the room where the crying was coming from. but the door had long been locked from the outside. Outside of the door was also a closed thick layer of dust. So a neighbor in the next room opened the door to let the men go into the mysterious room through the connecting corridor between the two rooms. Once outside, the men also felt a little strange that the glass door looked very dusty, as if no one had been there in a long time. A brave person took the initiative to go to the front, look into the window to try to break the door to enter the house. But unexpectedly inside the room were no people except for a girl's soul which appeared. Hearing the noise, the girl immediately turned her face to the window, revealing a white horrible face with white eyes that were bleeding red blood instead of tears. The girl's ghost found out about the strangers, suddenly became aggressive and wanted to fly out to chase away the men who were looking at her. The man just witnessed the horror scene, feeling extremely panicked and unable to bear it. He ran as fast as he could to his room. From that day on, that cry grew louder and louder. It echoed throughout the corridors of each room. Many people also saw the girl's ghost in the abandoned room. It was wearing a red dress. That ghost was crying and hovering in the corridor all along. The residents in the building could not stand this. One after another moved their houses to another place. Rumors of the ghost in the building were getting louder and louder. No one dared to come to this building anymore. After all of the residents had moved out, only the elderly couple remained in the building. The couple reluctantly stayed in the building because they had nowhere else to live. But every night the elderly couple received strange phone calls from whom they didn't know. At first they thought that someone was trying to break up the couple, but this lasted so long that the couple panicked. Every time the wife picked up the phone, there was no one on the other end of the line but only a cry, like the cry of the dead girl's soul. After that, the power lines in the building were also frequently broken. Every time that strange phone call came in, the electricity in the building would be completely turned off. The TV in the room was also interfered with, making the elderly couple gradually feel afraid and couldn't stand it anymore. Finally, the older couple also moved to another place. The building was inactive and has been abandoned ever since. Since the day the building was abandoned, no one dared to come near the building but the homeless who needed a place to stay. But so far, no one dared to stay there for a full night, because people would hear the screams of homeless people sleeping in the middle of the night. The whole building was immersed in the dark, scary, silent, attracting the attention of curious people. Many people in the neighborhood every night went passing by the building, and they saw the spirit of a girl standing outside the window with white eyes. Young people, because they were so curious about the ghostly rumors surrounding the building, they did not hesitate to come and explore. They went in as a group, exploring every nook and cranny of the house with its ruins. The air inside the building was colder than many people thought. Leaves and trash were scattered all over the corridor. They entered the room that was said to be haunted, and around there was nothing else besides the old items. A moment later, the young people immediately shouted in panic when they discovered something extremely horrifying. In front of them, there was a red cloth. It was similar to the rumor about the girl in the red dress that was often mentioned.
"There's nothing here, so it's just a rumor,"
said one young man. After checking, they did not find anything strange, so the group thought that the rumors about the girl's ghost was not true. From that moment on, the whole room had strange cold winds, causing the people in the room to feel a little scared. But because they did not believe the rumors, the group decided to continue to the other rooms to check. They entered a room at the end of the corridor. The size of the room here was also somewhat smaller than the other rooms. The interior did not have much furniture like the other rooms, and there was only one chair in the middle of the room. The young people also discovered many broken trees and a lot of small rocks lying around the chair on the floor. Everyone in the group started to get scared and discuss what had happened here. The only thing that interested them the most was the stool in the middle of the room. Many people began to question the origin of the other girl's soul. But no matter how much that were discussed, all the reasons given were too reasonable and irrational, making things even more stressful. A moment later, from within the wall appeared a girl with a red dress rushing towards a group of young people. The group started to panic, scream, and started to run, but the girl in the red dress kept chasing them down. The group quickly ran out of the building and made the ghostly rumors about this building become even more noticeable. The press and media also began to cover the building with questions raised about the mysteries there. The building then became more famous and noticed by many people. There were many people who did not hesitate to stay there overnight to verify the rumors. But not long after that, the whole building was sealed and a high-class hotel was built there. Strangely, after that, the hotel did well and did not appear to have any strange events.